All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Well, hello and welcome to the actual Anarchy podcast. This is that podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian Anarcho-Capitalist perspective. And tonight it's kind of a movie, kind of a musical. So we're going to stretch it just a little bit. But this is episode 191 of the show. We're going to be talking about Hamilton, which is a Broadway show that took the world by storm a couple of years ago and was just recently released on Disney Plus, just in time for Independence Day. So before we introduce our guest on the Last Night Sports Show, let's go check in with Robert down on the sidelines, wearing his black and gold and looking real good. The future's so bright. How you doing there, Robert?
You know this, sir. Yes, I'm feeling great, looking great. You know how we do it here in the FEMA region 6, 10? I forget. 6? 6.
I'll pull that up right now.
10!
And yeah, we are in 10, so.
I forgot.
Luckily, I have it read at the ready, just like, bam!
One of the
There's
shortcuts to the show. We mentioned it enough times.
Yeah, that's right. And eventually we will remember this. So I just want to check in with you and see how business is going.
So it's on the uptick, which is nice. I don't know why. We're not necessarily doing a whole lot differently, but I think the heat has kind of mellowed out and people are used to being out in the heat. So they're coming back out. I did have one person complain that I wasn't wearing a mask. It's a regular customer, and last time on Monday, she texted ahead of time to be like, "Could your cashier please be wearing a mask?" And I was like, "Okay, fine, I won't do it, but I'll have somebody at the cashier position wearing a mask for you. It'll be fine." So then she arrived. We had someone wearing a mask. But then she proceeded to kind of stick around and complain that the person last week, aka yours truly, wasn't wearing a mask. And I stood up and I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm not going to wear a mask." And at that point, she referred to herself as a mask Nazi. And I thought that was kind of fun that she at least acknowledged her position openly for the most part. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any in-depth commentary on that, but just one fun thing that's happening here.
No, I actually like that because it goes to show how a free market would solve the situation. Like, she's making her desires known, you're making your desires known, and she can decide to continue to go to your business or not, and you guys can resolve it that way. It doesn't need any force or any threats,
Indeed. We've had at least one customer that I've been aware of that is openly voiced, came up to the business in a mask, saw that we weren't wearing masks and said, "Oh, you're not masked up?" Did a 180, walked back and mumbled under his breath, like something to the effect of, "I can't believe how ignorant people are." So, hey, it was a regular customer. I'd seen that person before and we haven't seen him since. And I don't feel the least bit bad about it. If the business fails because we aren't wearing masks and the majority of our customers want us to wear masks, then we will go out of business. And I guess somewhat rightfully so. I'm not even that upset about it because it's at least people expressing their voluntary actions by, choosing to not patronize us for whatever reason that may be. I may disagree with that reason, but at least they're not calling for government to come in and shut us down because we're not wearing masks.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't get to that stage where they call the police instead of just leaving or something like that. I saw recently that police, I think in Florida, are going to start handing out tickets to people for not wearing a mask. $100 a pop for the first 2 offenses, and then a summons after that.
Wow. Now, where is that? Just in public and anywhere? Is that private businesses? Is this out on the street? Do you know?
Well, that would involve me reading beyond a Facebook post,
reading beyond the headlines.
And knowing
I can't do that.
what it's really about. But yeah, I assure you.
With one question, I have exposed your fundamental lack of knowledge. I apologize, sir.
No, see, I'm open about it. Just like the mask Nazi was open about being a mask Nazi. I'm open about my lack of information on this, though I think that there's plenty of information out there ready and available. But that's the other thing about this whole pandemic thing, is that there are so many contradictory pieces of information, articles, studies, videos, etc. And part of me is kind of wondering, like, is that intentionally done so that there is no real information? Like, everyone's going to go into their echo chambers and only accept the story that they're already hearing or susceptible or desiring to hear. Like the MSNBC and CNN crowd are going to go to their sources, and the Fox News crowd are going to go to their sources. People like us are going to look at all of it and be like, it's kind of fucked up, like this contradicts this over here. This doesn't make a lot of sense. Oh, look at this headline. Oh, but you read into it and it's like totally wrong. Oh, look, they're double counting over here. Oh, look, this guy who died in a motorcycle accident, they marked it as COVID. It's like really bizarre how this is all going out.
It's true. There's definitely room for an echo chamber to be formed, and with all the different information like you're talking about. But ultimately, I think what will please the authoritarians is just obedience, whatever the policy is, and you will ex post facto justify your emotional decision to go along and be obedient with all kinds of whatever information you can find. Be like, oh, no, I'm not being a cowardly obedient sheep. I actually have the science to back up my statements and my actions. So there. And then if they're contradicted, you either dismiss it as being wrong, on its face, or where did you hear that, the wrong side, or just walk away. It's definitely a divisive thing, and divide and conquer is the oldest trick in the book. But at the same time, why do we have to work and live together and coexist in the same spaces and be ruled by the same people? I don't know.
Yeah, decentralization, secession, all the way down to the individual.
Oh, so you're an anti-Hamilton. Oh.
Well, I have a pro Hamilton argument, and like I said in the pre-show, it's not.
So you're a fence sitter. Oh, okay.
It's not a malice one, but it is a good one. It's a good source. So we'll get into that in the last Night's part of the show, where we are going to introduce our guest right after these messages. Stand by. Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Paul Johnson. We are the Last Nighters. You can find us on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. This is episode 135 of the show, and we're going to be talking about the musical on Disney Plus called Hamilton. So you can find the show notes more at lastnighters.com/135. We had some pretty significant and epic pre-show bonus content available for our Patreon supporters. So if you want to get in on that action, it's about a half an hour of three dudes just trying to make technology work. So probably 90% of it is garbage, but there's a good 10% nugget of goodness in there. And if you're willing to pay for that, go to lastnighters.com/Patreon. We'll be happy to take your money. So let's get into the introduction of our guest. It is Tho Bishop. He is the assistant editor of the Mises Wire, the daily blog over at the Mises Institute. He is a bit of a Hamilton scholar and had a very interesting post on Facebook that I saw talking about Hamilton. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, do you want to come on to the show, talk about this movie? That's what we do here. We talk about it from a ANCAP perspective. And he agreed. He foolishly agreed to join us. So Tho Bishop, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to. I always like the opportunity to talk about Alexander Hamilton, which is one of my most controversial positions at the Institute. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So tell us why is this a controversial position? Like, can you lay out your position for us just real quickly, and then we'll get into the movie.
Yeah, well, I was a fan of Hamilton before the musical, before the Malice Woods debate. When the biography by Ron Chernow came out, when the biography came out I think it was 2010, something around that time. I read it pretty early on, and at the time I was kind of aimless. I hadn't really gotten really hard into anything economics related. I was a Ron Paul fan, but I remember in history class back in the day and in high school, like this Hamilton character kind of seemed like a pretty big deal. And so I saw the biography and read it, and it completely changed my life. Like Hamilton's narrative, his story, I think is truly incredible. I mean, man was born in nothing. It rose up to be not only one of the most important founding fathers, but one of the most important intellectuals in American history and really world history. And there's something about that really excited me. And I got him reading economics and going as a 21-year-old being a important part of Washington's army, being really an indispensable man during the Revolution for Washington. That was just very inspirational for someone that didn't really know where he was going in life at the time. And so in fact, the first book I read from Tom DeLorenzo was Hamilton's Curse, and I bought it purely to hate read it. Because I wanted to see who this guy was. I was picking on my man, and he completely won me over in all the economic arguments. Like that was really the red pill that got me to go deep into Austrian economics. I was reading kind of broadly at the time. I was reading Friedman. I even read a little bit of Krugman. I didn't know exactly where to go in this economic stuff, and I picked up DeLorenzo because I wanted to hate read his book, and he ended up just completely winning me over. I think that he takes some pot shots at Hamilton a little bit during it. Like at one point, he references something that Jefferson said about Hamilton and kind of implied that was kind of the real motivation there. And I'm not sure if I believe that. But of course, again, as a good Rothbard, I recognize that Hamilton's ideas were counter-revolutionary, right? I mean, he was a true conservative, trying to bring the European monarchy into America, into the New World, and the consequences from that are devastating. And in fact, there's a really interesting connection that you can make with so Hamilton's school of thought became known as the American system. That was the American system of economics, in contrast to the British free trade schools of Adam Smith and the French liberals. So there's a German economist named Frederick List that actually came to America to learn economics, and all he was doing was reading about Hamilton's economic nationalism, the protectionist policies, the incubation of industries, and all that. And List's work ended up being extremely important to Bismarck, and was also an inspiration for Hitler's economics under the Third Reich. And so you have this very interesting kind of parallel within the 30s of kind of this revival of Hamiltonian thought in America and Hitler simultaneously. So pretty much, the economics of fascism, you can all trace back to this Hamiltonian school. So I'm well, I understand all the complaints. I think they're all valid. But again, there's something to be said about a guy that can rise up. And there was a very meritocratic element to Washington's army that I think is really interesting, kind of really American in its nature. I mean, it's not just Hamilton. But also Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox they had no real military background. They were all kind of really self-taught in the ways of war, and so that kind of always resonated with me. So I'm still willing to defend him. And in fact, I mean, I think that it'd been Rothbard kind of has a less than favorable view of Washington as a general. I think some of that stuff is very valid. But I don't think Washington would have been successful as the leader of the Continental Army without Hamilton, because of some of the responsibilities that he places on Hamilton's shoulders, particularly with this episode dealing with Horatio Gates, who was a very popular and powerful general that was having his own successes, and that was there's this political rivalry building during the war between Gates and Washington, And so he had to send Hamilton over to negotiate with Gates to get troops moved to Hamilton to Washington's control. And I think kind of Hamilton was the only one that Washington would kind of trust with that mission, which is kind of crazy considering he's like 21, 22 years old at the time. So I like that element of it. And for me, like it's an incredibly inspirational story in spite of the bad economics. So, but that's why I was very excited for when the musical came about. And I think they do a pretty good job of capturing that element of it without kind of making Hamilton look too good. I've talked to a lot of people that have watched the music that Hamilton's kind of a dick. It's like it's kind of true. I mean, it's kind of who he is. But that story always kind of resonated with me, and I don't know if I would have gone down the path I did if I had not read that biography way back in the day. So I'll always have a special spot in my heart for Mr. Hamilton.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That was quite the opening. So
yeah, that's a big grab. I gave away all my good stuff right there. Sorry.
Well, no, that's totally good, and we'll be sure to respond to it over the course of the episode here. But we usually start out with the Google description, so thanks for winding it back to the musical.
Okay.
And Robert, I'll go to you for your response here. So Hamilton came out on Broadway about 5 years ago, and then on Disney Plus came out on July 4th, I think, this year. It's a drama, 2 hours and 40 minutes. 8.9 IMDb, 99% Rotten Tomatoes, 99% Metacritic, and 95% of Google users liked it. The description reads, the original Broadway production of the award-winning musical that tells the story of Alexander Hamilton, first Secretary of the Treasury, blending hip-hop, jazz, R&B, and Broadway styles, filmed from the Richard Rodgers Theater in New York. Initial release July 3rd, 2020. Director Thomas Kail. Music composed and starring and written by Lin-Manuel Miranda. The budget was $12.5 million for the stage production, which they recorded over the course of, I think, 3 performances. And it was a long musical that we both watched, Robert. What's your take in the open here?
It was certainly a long musical that we both watched. Yes, Daniel. Well, as you know, I can't stand musicals. I don't mind a good song here and there, like they do it in most Disney films. They'll have some song that they're all of a sudden going to sing, and it has to do with kind of what's going on. But in this, you have every single line of dialogues either sung or rapped. And like in Les Mis, in Les Mis, I couldn't stand it really, really badly. Like I hate watch that movie. This is more impressive and more fun to watch. It was like rapped. So there's a lot of skill and a lot of detail, and just you could tell the talent on display by Lin-Manuel Miranda was obvious. And I think if he ever does anything with more appealing subject matter, I will be on board to watch it. But I can't get past the endless bootlicking statism in this film. If in 250 years there's some VR production, or however human beings get downloaded entertainment into their brains, where there's some young, beautiful Nancy Pelosi singing and dancing on her magical quest to defeat some orange demon for the soul of America, or whatever propaganda bullshit they come up with, I will be much disappointed. So, this movie, it doesn't necessarily have, it presents more human characters, but it still has a whole lot of in one scene, they're like, teach the people how to say goodbye. And all this nanny, we look to our politicians to teach us as if we're students and they're teachers kind of crap that just made me want to throw up. So it's a mixed bag. It's a lot of entertainment. It's a lot of fun. But at the same time, it's a whole bunch of status crap that really, I don't know, super problematic, man. That's why I hate it. I don't know. It's not the worst thing ever.
All right. Well, it sounds like you're going to give it a low score.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing all the pro-Hammy arguments. I came out of this going, Ham's a bad man. And the fact that he's pro-national bank guy. But I'm looking forward to hearing why he's a good freedom dude.
Well, as Tho mentioned in the open, he likes the hard upbringing that he had and overcame and still accomplished things. Though it sounds like, though, you're not a big fan of the things he necessarily accomplished.
Well, you could probably say that about Joseph Stalin. He was a man of humble origins who was born into a very low family that was barely struggling to survive, and he rose to great heights. I mean, how can you not be inspired by that story? Come on, Joe Stalin, man. Who's not a fan?
There's some great freedom lines. You raise a glass to freedom, something they can never take away, no matter what they tell you. Right? Raise a glass to the four of us. There's some, and that's in the early days. I mean, it's funny because, and they actually do a good job. Like Hamilton before the war was actually a big pamphleteer in favor of the revolutionary cause. He's got all these great lines about there's a certain element of liberty that is written as if by God, within the human character. I'm completely butchering it, but I like that they actually capture that he was early on. He was actually a pretty radical liberal in the proper sense. But yeah, it definitely got and at least there's a good anti-war rap in it. So at least he had some good anti-war stuff in it. Of course, he liked waging war against whiskey rebellion, but rebels. But at least one of the two cabinet battles was a good anti-war message. So at least there's a takeaway there.
When he was arguing for not helping out with the French-England War, right?
Yes.
They're talking about, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Now,
when Jefferson wanted to help the French and he didn't.
Right.
Now, how accurate is some of that stuff? Because I know Washington said don't get into foreign entanglements. They sort of talk about that in the musical a little bit, but I always read Jefferson as more of a atomized, decentralized situation where he wouldn't have wanted to intervene, especially when they pointed out that treaty or whatever was in place at the time was with the monarch who just got deposed or whatever. So like their obligation wasn't to the people who had beheaded, was it King Louis?
Yeah. Look, King Louis's head. Yeah, that whole thing. No, I mean, Jefferson. So I'm not a big Jefferson fan. Like even he did a great job writing, but I'm just not a Jefferson fan in general. I think that's one of the great paradoxes of the American Revolution is that the man with the best ideas, even though Jefferson had some quirks of his own, the man with the best ideas was one of the worst people of the American Revolution, and the best man of the Revolution had the worst ideas, and so we're having to claw ourselves back from there. But during that whole period, though, like you had a French diplomat, Citizen Guinault, who came to the U.S. to try to get American support for the French cause against the British, and Jefferson was big on this. I mean, that was a very big. It was fairly accurate with the way they portrayed that battle within the administration, because Jefferson saw the French cause as equal to the American cause, influenced by his time over there and all that, and he saw that we had an obligation to kind of help our brothers in liberty over there. And Hamilton himself, he wrote that speech for when Washington left that had that the language about avoiding foreign entanglements. So that itself, some of Washington's best stuff came from Hamilton's pen. Now again, there's Hamilton wouldn't necessarily. Again, Hamilton had no problem sending in the troops against Pennsylvania whiskey rebels and against his own Americans. But he totally wanted to invade Canada. So again, he's not great on this thing generally, but he was okay with not sending our troops across the pond.
Well, that's kind of my problem with him is he's just so inconsistent. I mean, on the one hand, he's part of the revolution, so he's like pro-secession. But at the other time, he's like, let's make this powerful national government that all the colonies are going to have to be beholden to. So we're going to secede from one central oligarchy and create this other central oligarchy. It's like we're going to be seceding from England, but we're going to unify under Washington. It just seems like a whole bunch of contradictions here.
Well, what Hamilton saw was that again, you have to think of at the time for one, and this is something I think that Michael Malice kind of appreciates about Hamilton, is that he was raised in the Caribbean and he was terrified of the darkness of human nature. Malice talks a lot about how like Americans don't have a full appreciation for human evil, because we've had it pretty good, even for all of our faults in America, that us relative to the Soviet Union. I think that kind of relates to some of his sympathies to the Hamiltonian cause in that regard. And so Hamilton was terrified of the mob, and in much the same way that Mises was, right? I mean, Mises feared the A word because he was terrified at what he had seen from left-wing anarchists in Europe. And so he was terrified of what chaos and violence could come from mob rule. And so Hamilton saw that, well, okay, you can have, Adam Smith can have all these great ideas about free trade and what liberalism could truly look like. But what we know is that the greatest country in the world today is Great Britain. So why wouldn't America want to try to recreate this for itself rather than now again? So he was a devout American nationalist. Now again, the argument, of course, the Rothbardian argument, conceived in Liberty 5, that Patrick Newman came together. He does a great job of kind of giving the opposite view, and really kind of selling the Constitution as totally just a coup by financial speculators and corporate land developers that wanted to use the central power to make sure that they were getting the as much bang for their buck as possible. But I think Hamilton was really concerned about how do you check the excesses of liberty. Perhaps he went a little too far.
But how could that be true, though?
How
How is he checking the excesses if he says that King George III is a tyrant, but yet he wants to replicate the system that allows King George to be a tyrant in America?
He wants King George I of Washington. He trusts Washington.
He just wants the right ruler.
The closer ruler.
Washington, so,
Okay, so he wants a closer one that he can
influence, and then it'll be good.
He wants an American ruler. He wants an American ruler for an American people. Yeah.
Okay, but he didn't view that the states would remain their own sovereigns, right? Like once they joined this compact, they were going to be stuck together. So he was like a proto-Lincoln in that regard.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, and you can trace this directly. I mean, Hamilton's ideas directly influenced Henry Clay, which directly influenced Lincoln. And so that's it. And it's a shame because after the kind of the Virginia dynasty of Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and it was supposed to be Crawford was going to be the follow-up, and then he had a stroke and still managed to beat Henry Clay in a presidential campaign after that, which is a fun story in itself. At that time, it kind of looked like the Jeffersonian wing had dominated American politics, but then you had the rise of Henry Clay and the Whigs, and creating the prologue for the Lincoln great destruction of the Republic. But I don't deny the long-term consequences of it. But I think that again, he wanted us to be as great as Great Britain, and unfortunately, that meant. He didn't have quite the creativity that in the vision that Jefferson had on what a truly free society could do, and he didn't have faith that states, that the individual states by themselves could rise to prominence, which is unfortunate. Again, America would be much better off if he had appreciated that it was that decentralized political aspect of Europe that made it great in the first place. But so here we are.
Yeah, that's basically my argument. That. I mean, I know Malice likes the idea that the country of America exists and that it's been a positive icon of freedom and liberty or whatever in the world. But how do we know that the 50 states couldn't have individually done better?
It's counterfactual at this point. I find it interesting that, I mean, Rothbard's view in what I have read is that we basically have the Hamiltonian system right now. We've got the central bank, we've got the corporate interest entrenched with government, like almost down the line, all the Hamiltonian ingenuity is in place today. So why would, maybe Manuel's not of the left, but he does seem to be a liberal type Democrat, like present day liberal. Why would the left choose Hamilton to be a champion 5-6 years ago when this was in development? And follow-up question, would they be regretting that decision in present 2020?
Well, I think this is an interesting illustration of how far the left has moved culturally. Because under the Obama years, when this came out, in fact, I think the first debut of the music of this play was Lin-Manuel performing the first song for Obama and the First Lady at a very fancy tuxedo event. And it's kind of like the same way that the West Wing was kind of like peak, like good government LARPing for the left, and it was kind of this great fiction that during the Bill Clinton years, where you kind of had like the beauty of that 90s liberalism without the kind of the ickiness of Bill Clinton. I think they kind of saw Hamilton as this rags to riches story that showed what good, what competent bureaucrats could accomplish. He was able to build this massive system, and the left under Obama was very proud of America. They were very proud of the system that was in place. They wanted to do a few more things, but they were very proud of what America was. Now they're not. And so now I think you have a very interesting situation where I've already seen it with kind of like boomer Republicans back home, where a lot of them that would have never watched, they would have never gone to Broadway to watch the play or even travel to Atlanta for it. With it coming out, with all of the tearing down of statues, it was amazing how many people in my social media feed were saying, "Oh, I just watched Hamilton for the first time. Like, this is amazing." And so I think this is a very interesting scenario where I think that you're going to see the right kind of take over the love affair with this musical. Especially you don't have that cultural gate.
Upside down world.
I know. So you don't have that because Broadway itself is kind of a cultural gatekeeper, right? I mean, I'm pulling it out of my rear, but I guarantee you 60-40, 70-30, the political ideology of like your average Broadway
progressive
consumer.
Totally, yeah.
Now it's available for the masses. Now it's mass consumption. You can now turn on Disney Plus. That I think it helps into it. But again, now that patriotism is kind of counter is its own act of rebellion.
It is. It's
like that. I think that's interesting. And I think one of the other things that the play does well is that, like, in many ways, kind of like Burr's kind of the star of the show. And I'm also a Burr fan, which because I'm just very very complicated in that way. But I Burr's some of my favorite songs in it are the Burr focused songs, particularly when he's singing to his daughter. So like I think it does a good job of showing again some of the flaws in Hamilton. It shows his talents, and really kind of the true hero. The character that's really deified within this musical is Washington.
Mm-hmm.
What you would expect from any great American, novel, right? I mean, like this is again, regardless of the criticism of Washington, and again, Washington went along with all of Hamilton's crazy plans, right? So, like, I mean, he deserves all that blame as well. But it's also interesting in the year 2020, seeing Washington so strongly defended and praised. I think it's also kind of little stick it to him.
Yeah, I wonder how that plays today in present day people watching this, because they would want to tear down Washington symbols and statues, right? Because he owned slaves, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
No, absolutely. And then even I think having a minority cast do it, that's one of the things I like best about it, because like it elevates this idea that the beauty of America is not purely on racial white supremacist grounds. And that is very subversive. And that is very much against the left's narrative now. And I think that's something where I think that alienated a lot of conservatives back when it came out, right? It's like, oh, why is it that the two biggest villains outside of Burr, why is it the two biggest villains, the cartoon characters are King George and General Charles Lee? Those are the other two, people played by white guys. Oh, this is just, this is its own form of reverse racism or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, this is like a stick it to them to like, oh, America is an inherently racist country. So I think that's a changing dynamic, which again shows how far we've gone in just a few years.
Yeah, back to your point about this came about during the Obama years. I can totally see the changing of all the races of the characters as a the Obama high of like, we're America, and so we're making this history like part of everybody's history. And so that's like why they would do that. And now I would view this just the way you said conservatives viewed it originally. Now I'm like, well, wait, they changed all the characters just like they're doing all the comic book characters are now, you know, there's women characters and whatever. And it's just like for the sake of making it different, like when they came out the new version of the Ghostbusters or whatever. Yeah. And it's like they can't come up with original content, so they just swap a race or swap a gender and pump it out, you know. And to me, it looks lazy, you know. But yeah, it does. In watching this recently, it's like, okay, is this just another case of that? But because it originated 5 years ago, I think it is actually the previous thing. It's not so much they're just changing it for the sake of changing it.
It's so bizarre that something created by such progressive lefties only like 5 years ago is now like loved by the right. It's just, I live in the clown world. I just do. I don't understand this.
We are, yeah. Oh, it's an insane world. But again, it really, that's why when I watched it when it came on Disney Plus, like that's what really just stuck out to me. It's like it's incredible how far this has gone. And we're not making this up. It's not like we are assuming what the left. I mean, like you had multiple very serious think pieces about how problematic Hamilton is now. Oh, it doesn't pay enough attention to slavery. And it's like, well, I mean, like, and it's funny. I mean, I've seen like college leftists that mock the musicals, like, oh, all it's trying to do is showing how Hamilton pulled himself up by his bootstraps and wasn't racist. Like, well, that's also the narrative. Like, I mean, that's the real thing. Like, this isn't made up. Like,
that's a right talking point. How dare you?
Like, oh yeah. This is propaganda for the bourgeoisie, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and in my watching of it, I noticed they mentioned slavery 3 or 4 times. They mentioned extending equal rights to women several times, like the vote for women, or that they should have the vote. Like there were a bunch of like, at least as of 5 years ago, progressive things kind of plugged in there, little nods to these things. Like you're right, Robert. We have gone into clown world because it wasn't that long ago when this stuff came out. But it did seem like it was inserted in there to like make it more, I don't know, hip or more woke at the time. And now it's like, it's not enough. Now the complaint is, right, well, they didn't focus enough on it.
Yeah. Right. And that's the snowballing cultural tornado that is the left, that no one can keep up with it. Not even something made 5 years ago.
It's cultural accelerationism. Like we have political acceleration, cultural accelerationism also makes like this is exactly it's very anti-critical critical race theory. So yeah, that makes it very subversive in today's world.
Right. Yeah. And another thing they did in there, another thing they interjected in the modern day perspective, they said all men created equal, have a man a female, or calling Thomas Jefferson a slaver, because Jefferson was talking about how they had built the society in the South or built the culture in the South. And then they called him out and said, well, that was all unpaid labor, right, trying to knock him down. So they're trying to make Jefferson kind of the villain in this. And at the time, it kind of makes sense. And I'm sympathetic to Rothbard's argument that Jefferson is kind of like the libertarian ideal of the American Revolutionary founding fathers, and he's not a big fan of Hamilton, as you know. He calls him I'm going to butcher this, but the Mephistophelan figure in American history, because he came up with the bank and the strong national government and all of those things. But yeah, it's just so backwards. And I just wanted to bring up the other pro Hamilton argument that came out in researching for this. And Robert, I'll have you guess where this is from. All right. So this is a footnote on a page. It says, of the American founders, Alexander Hamilton was a monarchist. Likewise, the governor of Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, had strong monarchist leanings. George Washington expressed his profound distaste of democracy in a letter from September 30, 1798 to James McHenry. John Adams was convinced that every society grows aristocrats as inevitably as a field of corn will grow some large ears and some small. In a letter to John Taylor, he insisted, like Plato and Aristotle, that democracy would ultimately evolve into despotism. And in a letter to Jefferson, he declared that democracy will envy all, contend with all, endeavor to pull down all, and when by chance it happens to get the upper hand for a short time, it will be a revengeful, bloody, and cruel. So, you got any ideas on that one, Robert?
Wait, this is a pro Hamilton argument. I'm not even sure I followed that.
It's a pro-Hamilton argument because Hamilton was trying to emulate the King George model. He was a bit of a monarchist in this argument.
And they're saying this is a good thing.
Yeah.
This is a pro-monarchy argument.
Yes.
Hamilton is proto-Hoppian.
So the only person that I know would be Hoppe.
That is correct, sir.
That would say something like this. Okay.
Yeah. Footnote on page 103 of Democracy, the God That Failed. So he's building the case that a monarchy would be more incentivized to be better off for the populace than a democracy. And so this is one of his arguments.
Right. But which is fairly, I don't have a whole lot of argument against that. At least you have the incentive thing, which is absolutely true. I guess that's why, they have the Supreme Court so that people are immune from the lures of being corrupted because you serve for life. So you're not going to, you have an incentive to live under the system that you're creating. Whereas democracy, you come in, you loot, you get out, and then you reap the benefits of the short-term policies you created. It's still not what I want, but I guess it is slightly better. I don't know. Malice was saying that, I think I recently heard him say that Hamilton was good because it was preferable to the mob. Like you had two choices. But I still don't see how my choice isn't on the table. Is he saying it's impossible? I don't think so. I mean, maybe it wasn't at the time, but I just don't see that. Maybe the thinkers, the ideas developed at the time, but I don't know, man. I'm not going to give him a pass entirely because let me put out a coherent thought. I don't think he's all bad. I think there's something to be said that Hamilton is a decent guy, but you can't be so contradictory and create this system that lives on destroying private property, but yet somehow upholding private property. And I understand the argument for the fascists, like the Mike C argument, that would say like we need this strong central power to show us the light and to lead us towards the good guys, the good way, and like protect us from the mob and that sort of thing. But I still think that there's just it doesn't follow that. God, I'm totally having a brain fart right now. I don't know why. Go ahead.
It sounds like you're almost talking about this contradictory notion that Hamilton might have had in preserving some property rights, but then exploiting them. But there's also the idea of the golden goose. Like you don't want to kill the golden goose. You just want to contain it, control it. You want to still have it produce for you. So you can only molest it so much before it won't produce. So you can, parasitically grow your government on top of it.
You talking about having like a small government?
Well, not as small as Jefferson, but big enough to be a player on the world scene, but then also reap the benefits of the better production. And Tho, I think you're going to jump in on that.
Yeah, and that was Hamilton's idea for that was his defense for the central bank, was that if you had the tighter that you can link the performance and the stability of the government with the financial interest of the major financial players at the time, then that would create kind of its own bulwark, or like that if your goal is to create a stable, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but like his argument was that the more you can intertwine these interests, that both would kind of protect each other. So that the power brokers that and of course what he is viewing a stable and strong, capable government as an inherent good, and also national unity as an inherent good. And again, I think that's where things go awry. So, you didn't need all the states within the same thing, and that comes to somewhere where Burr gets really interesting later on in history. But he wanted to bring those interests in line, and he also saw that he was also a big defender of corruption, and he talked about how like it was the corruption within the British government that ended up kind of greasing the wheels to really getting stuff done. So again, it was kind of this darker view, the dark arts view of the actual art of governing. That he didn't try to romanticize it, right? He wasn't an idealist, he wasn't a utopian, and I think that that was a big contrast between Jefferson and Hamilton. Is that Jefferson had these ideas of what could happen that has never been done before. And whereas Hamilton was looking backwards and saying, what is the best model that's ever existed and how can we replicate it? And so that's where some of that comes in. But there is, I think, another big thing that, again, I think this is Rothbard would disagree on this, I think, in a lot of ways. But one of the big politically unpopular pushes that Hamilton, put a lot of capital in was reclaiming the Revolutionary War debts at par. And when you consider that at the time you had again, massive financial speculators buying up Revolutionary War debts from revolutionary veterans, that Hamilton put his line in the sand that if we want to be a government and a society of order and of contracts, then we have to enforce these debt payments at par, because failing to do so would end up creating an unstable society of mob rule. Rothbard again saw the entire thing of trying to bail out and make these speculators whole as part of the big problem and the big motivating factor for the coup of the Constitutional Convention. But I know, like Malice in particular, during his first episode of Tom Wood Show, he said like, "Oh, this is one of the big defining marks is that he was upholding contracts." And I'm not quite sure where I stand on that one. I think both sides are pretty interesting. But that's another side where there's some interesting nuance, and I think there's one more lesson that libertarians could take from this, because again, like a lot of Hamilton's early plans were he tried to build his own direct system of subsidies to create an industrial city. I think it was in New Jersey, and it completely failed. It did not work, and so I see it as the other way, is that if the greatest bureaucrat in world history, and that's one that for all of Hamilton's faults, he was incredibly competent, right? Albert Gallatin, who was Jefferson's treasury secretary, who's also a very interesting guy. I think he's someone that needs to be more done, because he was he had some really interesting things in monetary policy and things like that. Gallatin, was a big critic of Hamilton. The first thing he did when he took in was go over the books of Hamilton's treasury. And he was like, my God, like he was expecting to find corruption. He was expecting to find all these backroom deals. Like, my God, like these books are immaculate. So again, if the greatest bureaucrat in human history couldn't make these grand projects work, what hope is there for the amount of for the incompetent boobs that are in Washington now? So again, if Hamilton can't do it, nobody can.
Okay, and that was again why Hamilton was made, right? Was because it was the Obama years, and you're trying to show a competent person doing all these great things. But what I didn't understand in the musical and the frame of reference of the lay viewer watching this, what was the accomplishments that people could look up to? It seemed to be, oh, he wrote so many of the Federalist Papers and he got the bank through.
He created Wall Street. This is
how can they cheer that? How? They hate Wall Street.
The move from neoliberalism to democratic socialism, right there. That charts it.
Yeah, it's wild.
From building Wall Street to occupying Wall Street.
But it also seemed like they were playing to a New York audience. Like there was a lot of emphasis on New York being central to a lot of these things happening. So maybe that was why some of the Wall Street stuff was there and was good. Though, I mean, how many people who go to Broadway shows are tourists? Probably, like big chunk of them. But yeah, it's so bizarre that you see this movie or this play now, and it's the meaning has all changed, and that's the weird thing about like an artistic piece. It's really up to the perception of the viewer and the times in which you're viewing it. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And that's why we get like a lot of this cancel culture kind of stuff, like people watching movies or things that are made 15, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, try showing Blazing Saddles to somebody right now, you know, try to get Mel Brooks like kicked off of Twitter, right? Something like that. Or Tropic Thunder, Robert Downey Jr. is getting in trouble for that again. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of understand like why these things happen, but I really wish that we could get back to, and I swear we'll start talking about this movie again or this play, get back to the, if you don't want to associate with somebody, then you don't associate with them. Like if you don't want to see something that they're writing or typing or tweeting, then don't follow them on Twitter. Don't be their Facebook friend. Don't go in a group that you're going to see them. Block them or whatever. Don't get them like fired from their job for having wrongthink. You know, like what happened to just leaving the room if you don't want to be there? And if you think a show or a movie isn't a good movie, then don't go to that movie.
Oh, Daniel, you're so cute.
So quaint, right? So antiquated.
What archaic ideas you have.
I don't know. I thought it was a good point.
Well, it kind of goes into like I think it was Matt Taibbi that had the article about how the left has become the right, and like you know they're trying to use the state to enforce a very specific religious sort of worldview. It's just they've replaced the Judeo-Christian values for this rabid egalitarianism. But it's the left has become that the worst elements of the right, the right that Rothbard railed about in some of his 70s work. That's exactly what we've seen take place.
Right, and when Robert and I were growing up, we saw the right as like trying to censor music and censor speech and things like that, and trying to impose their morality on everyone else. And so we sort of leaned left in the freedom of speech and free expression, and you can say whatever you want, and being anti-war. And it's totally reversed now. Well, not totally reversed. Like everyone seems pro-war now, which is kind of unfortunate. I don't know.
It's not talked about anymore. I don't think war isn't it. I don't even know the left's position on war because it totally seems to depend.
Yeah, they didn't want to hear from Tulsi Gabbard. She was the only one talking sense on that. It's the only thing she talks sense on.
She was an Assad agent. We all know that. Come on.
Putin's puppet, right? And speaking of an anti-war message, I'm not going to vote. I'm not a big fan of Jorgensen and Cohen because of the tweet heard around the world a couple of weeks ago. But they just came out with a campaign video that's anti-war. It's really good. It's really good. Yeah. And it's reminiscent of like some of the Ron Paul ones from 2012, like the one like What If They Were Here? And there's somebody who animated that with all the every word kind of like being animated and moving around. Like what if China had ships in the Gulf of Mexico or whatever. So I'll post that on our show notes page because I think it was really, really well done. And it's very anti-war, and I think it can inspire people to at least consider that idea once again. One of those other antiquated ideas, apparently.
I don't know. Apparently Trump's trying to get his troops out of Afghanistan, or at least he's acting or talking like he is. I don't know.
Yeah, but then everyone voted against that.
Like, was it actually, it was up for a vote and all the Democrats blocked it? Is that what happened?
That sounds about right in the limited headline reading that I read. Tho sounds like he knows.
Our limited knowledge. Tho,
the Democrats proactively took action to try to stop what Trump could do. And that was the big reason for like that whole article, the whole story about, Russia was putting up bounties for killing American soldiers in Afghanistan. So they used that to justify, making sure that Trump has he can't pull us out, which is just.
Yeah, didn't that bounty thing? Didn't the bounty thing end up like not being true?
I think that it ended up being, there were some reports, but like there were reports about everything. So I don't know. Okay. It sounds like typical propaganda. But
I was heard that they're. Right. I mean,
But I don't see why that would dictate. I mean, that just seems like a better reason to get them out. Like we're gonna have people trying to, other countries trying to put bigger targets, and I don't see how this is a reason to keep them in.
It's just going to steal their resolve. Oh, they're going to get paid for this? Well, now we're definitely going to stay. I don't know. It's totally bizarre.
Yeah, then they'll let the tax jump for doing nothing about it, but now he's trying to get them out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you can't please these
people. Trying to do something.
That earlier on, Tho, you were talking about Hamilton and Jefferson having differing opinions on helping France, and that Jefferson wanted to help them because they were fellow revolutionaries. But weren't they the communist-style revolutionaries in France at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the great, when you really see the ups and the downs of kind of that Enlightenment, liberalism, where you're completely tearing down everything in the past and kind of this deification of reason as the end. I mean, you have two very different strains of revolution. You got the American Revolution, you have the French Revolution, and that was always one of the things that concerned Hamilton about Jefferson, was that, again, he saw him as a utopian, which is what made him blind to some of the excesses of the French Revolution. I think it's valid, and this was something that divided the founding fathers throughout. I mean, Thomas Paine, had a lot of sympathies for the French Revolution, and then ended up having to be, also started being chased by Jacobins for being too friendly. I mean, that was a very divisive issue within the founding fathers, because they had that kind of, you had that kind of paradox of, what is the right, it's mixed interest. That makes history so interesting.
Well, in a present day scenario, we've got these unmarked vans confiscating people on the streets of Portland, and there's this outcry, like, where are the libertarians when it's happening to these Antifa people? And I'm kind of with Eric July on this. Like, it's two rival gangs fighting over turf.
Right.
And so I don't really root for one necessarily, but one side was out there unchecked for like 2 months, and now there's finally somebody doing something about it. I don't know. I'm not going to cry about it,
But it is a key point to know that these people are looking for conflict. The commies in Portland are out there to start a fight. And the more pushback they get, that only makes them stronger. Not to say that you just got to give them free run of the freaking city and let them burn it down, but they are looking for headlines.
Escalation.
They're looking for escalation. Absolutely. They're looking for people to get black bagged so they can go, look, we're getting black bagged. I don't know how you fight that. I think it's a smart tactic on their part. I got to give them that. But I don't know. I think it's all bad. I don't know necessarily I can cheer for one side or the other.
Right. And it sets the precedent, because now if they do it to those guys, well, now it's that much easier to do it to somebody who's slightly less egregiously, almost worthy of something like that. So, then eventually it can be like that poem, like first they came for the communists, and then I didn't speak up for them because I wasn't a communist, and then they came for, whatever else. Eventually we're going to be up on that chain.
Well, and why haven't I heard anybody but the libertarians calling out the NDAA? I haven't heard any of the commies talking about the NDAA at all. They're not calling out Obama for signing it. They're just saying, libertarians, why aren't you defending us?
I mean, these are the people that have been calling for a greater role. They've been calling for centralized power. They've been calling for empowering DC because they thought that they were going to control it. And now those weapons are being used against them. This is what a centralized, powerful federal government looks like. I'm not too worried about kind of the precedents it's set, because I think it was inevitable that when things got to that point, it was going to be used regardless of this. Now it's not a defense of what's going on now. I don't think it's on principle. I never want to see federal agents going into the states and localities and trying to clean this stuff up. But I don't have a I had, and there are obviously, yes, there's some lefties out there that are rabid socialists that are in the more decentralized route. That's fine, whatever. They do exist. No broad brushes, whatever. But the majority of people out there would be perfectly fine with using these sort of troops against Tea Partiers or Second Amendment guys, or the people that were protesting the lockdowns, a few months ago, which seems like 2 years ago now.
I think if you held your breath waiting
they-
for them to defend a Tea Party or getting black bagged, I think you'd be blue in the face real quick.
Right.
Yeah.
And if the Chaz in Seattle had been Tea Party or right wing or Second Amendment people, it wouldn't have been permitted to last more than a day.
Right.
And you wouldn't see commies going, yeah, that's your right to do that.
Right.
Yeah. So the double standard, pretty strong on this one, I think.
The double standard is consistent. It comes both ways.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the Second Amendment, and this will relate back to the movie, and you'll see why, or the play. In the Second Amendment, there's a very particular comma that changes the meaning and interpretation of the amendment itself, similar to how the comma placement in one of the letters that Hamilton sent to, what was her name, Angelica?
Yes.
If she read it one way, it meant something, and if she read it another way, it meant something entirely different based on one comma alone. And I've heard this point made with the Second Amendment, is that the comma is there to define the article of what you're talking about. So it's the right of the people, or I'm going to butcher this, but the paraphrase, the need for
Well-regulated militia.
A well-regulated militia. But there's a comma there, being necessary for a free state, the right of the people will not be infringed. And that defines that it's the people itself and not a militia. And also, well-regulated didn't mean under regulation. It meant in working order or operating well, like well-trained and well-armed, or as equally armed as the government.
Correct.
So did I butcher that enough?
Assault McNukes are good.
I'm down with the McNukes. But I thought that was interesting that they even bring up that idea in Hamilton, in this kind of leftist progressive play, that the meaning of a comma in a founding father's writings can have significant meaning or change in the meaning of how you're going to read something. And that plays right into that argument about the Second Amendment, which I don't know if Miranda was aware of that, because I know that that's been around for quite a while, that interpretation. But I can't imagine that he would be a pro-gun guy.
Yeah, that's
I don't know the guy's politics, but he was on all the late night shows promoting this thing back in the day. So
I need to know. Yeah.
That's all you got to know, really.
He is within the cathedral.
Indeed, they do. Yeah. Now there is one joke. I guess this is sort of a comedy, a little bit, that kind of landed. At least for the New York audience. It said everything was legal in Jersey when they go to duel and kill each other in Jersey. I don't know if that's how long that's been true, but I think it's kind of interesting that people used to settle like disputes with pistols at range. And then I guess government made it illegal, so people stopped doing it, or we just stopped doing it and then government made it illegal after the fact. I don't know, but I'm wondering in Anarcho-Capitalist, would it be a thing maybe for two gentlemen to draw pistols at range and settle disputes the old-fashioned way? I don't know.
Well, how it was presented in the play, it really seemed like there was a series of steps that was all about trying to resolve the conflict, and there were many, many chances. And if you couldn't resolve it, then you went through with it and you knew what the consequences were going to be, and you were a willing participant in it. And I even think they mentioned that it was illegal to do it, but people did it anyway.
Yeah, although they did mention it was legal in Jersey. But maybe it was frowned upon, or maybe it was illegal in New York at least, right? At the time. Right.
And that's why Burr never faced charges for killing Hamilton because of that. But I definitely think Walter Block would defend dueling in Ancapistan.
Yeah, so I think so. Right?
Yeah, I think it's all been downhill since we got rid of dueling. Like, yeah, I think that's.
If people on Twitter had to duel to dispute, I think there'd be a whole lot less arguing. I don't know, or at least a lot more peaceful arguing. Yeah, you knew that you could face a gun. Yeah.
Well,
or
maybe
someone a dickwad or something. I mean, come on.
Maybe
it would be better.
Civilized. It'd be a better resolution to war, right? Because you're really having the two combatants, the belligerents, are the leaders are mad at each other. Well, all right, you guys duel. Leave the rest of us out of it.
King George, you guys go for it. Yeah.
It certainly helps settle some of the libertarian debates over like whether slander and libel, should be enforced in libertarian courts. Like then, if you just had dueling as a way of solving this, then you don't have to worry about the arguments on you don't own your reputation, someone else's mind. You can just either apologize or come out.
Yeah, you'd really get to know who really believed in their cause or not. You're like, oh no, I was just kidding, man. I was just playing. Don't take me seriously.
I'm not that principled. Yeah, all right. Well, we've mentioned Michael Malice a little bit, and he did a debate at the Soho Forum with Tom Woods a couple of years ago. I think it's 5-6 years ago now. And the resolution was Alexander Hamilton was a hero for the cause of liberty. Woods for the negative and Malice for the affirmative. Spoiler alert, everyone. Woods won that argument because he changed the most people's minds as far as the vote before the debate and then the vote after. So we'll have a link to that on the show notes page. It's always good to get perspectives on that. But I agree. A lot of Malice's arguments are actually really good. And then there is also a review of the play Hamilton by Kevin Gutzman, who wrote it in, I have a link to the American Conservative, where he talks about Hamilton Takes Broadway. So that'll also be on the show notes page. lastnighters.com/135. This is 135th episode of the show. You'd think we'd be good at this by now.
Wow. No, we're still bumbling along. Trying to form coherent thoughts and failing most of the time.
Yeah. Well, so Tho, we're going to be running out of time on the Last Nighters here, but you did mention Burr early on. Mm-hmm. So maybe just give us what is the good and bad about Burr, because he did play a really prominent role in this, and I think he was one of my favorite characters in the film or in the play.
Burr's a blast. The problem with Burr is that he really was the first example of the prototype politician in the worst sense. He was always very careful not to write anything down. You never really knew where he stood at times. Like that's one of the things that they really hit in the play. The man of ambition and all this. Like I think they do a good job of kind of painting that side of Burr. He was also a big feminist for his era. I mean, he had tremendous respect for women's intellect, which was high. I'll let others decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But like was a very defining trait of his within the era. But there's a fantastic book that I think is totally overlooked called The American Emperor about Burr. Because I think one of the great so you learn, at least I did in high school, very briefly they kind of touch on that Burr was brought up for treason charges after he was left the White House in Jefferson. And that episode is fascinating because basically you have Burr that is cast out of power, and he's still ambitious, and so he basically goes around and talks to figures like Andrew Jackson, like William Henry Harrison, all of these American military guys, and saying, "Hey, look, how there's that Spanish New Orleans over there," and Spanish New Orleans is a very big thing. Rothbard covers this in Conceived in Liberty 5, where like you have all these kind of Western territories, like Kentucky and some of these other areas that their future was based on the Mississippi River and being able to trade to other countries through the port of New Orleans. And America tried to get access to it. Spain wouldn't let it because, like, why would they? And so they're like, okay, why do we need Washington at all? Why do we need Washington D.C.? Like, let's just become Spanish territories instead. Like, it's a very interesting part of Conceived in Liberty. It's one of my favorite parts of that. But so Burr had another idea. So okay, why don't we just take it over by military force? And so Burr tries to get American military to just wage war against them as this unauthorized thing. And Jefferson kind of he sits on his hands. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to handle it. And then finally takes action. And he gets arrested. He's portrayed by this guy named James Wilkinson, who was actually one of the early on, hey, let's join Spain guys. He's mentioned in the Rothbard biography as well. He was on the payroll for like the U.S. government, the British government, the Spanish government, some Native American tribes. He was playing everyone. But the interesting counterfactual is that what if Burr had been successful? right? Like imagine if you would have had two parallel republics founded on kind of those spirit of 1776 values, right? In that era. I mean, would you have had the Civil War? Would it have come earlier? Would you, and that could have actually created the stage where instead of having this manifest destiny, a sea to shining sea America that we have today, we could have had parallel republics on the continent with those values, which have been very interesting. It's a shame. I wish Burr had been successful, but Burr's story, his attorney, when he's brought up on treason charges, was actually Henry Clay, which is kind of his first big moment. So there's all these great historical cameos in that book. I can't recommend it highly enough. And also, Gore Vidal wrote a biography on Burr. That's great. It's about this journalist that's following him around. He's an attorney and a journalist that's following him around because they're trying to figure out if Martin Van Buren, one of Rothbard's favorite politicians, and Patrick Newman's favorite American president, Martin Van Buren, whether Van Buren was actually Burr's love child, because he played around a little bit. And so Gore Vidal's Burr is actually great because it's just Burr bad mouthing every other founding father and this very this over the top personality, and I reckon that should be the sequel to Hamilton, is Gore Vidal's Burr. But again, he's a very he didn't have a lot of great principled values, but he did try to do one big thing, which had been a massive a success for the political decentralized movement. It's a shame he was not successful, but he was the first example of a terrible politician from a very opportunistic standpoint.
Yeah, and it is presented in the film. It's presented in the play. It's like he's also a prodigy with a high intellect, but he's one who's playing his cards close to his chest, so he's not accomplishing much. Whereas Hamilton is not only bright, but he's also taking action and getting a lot of things done. And so I think that was the contrast that they were presenting there. So that was fairly accurate as far as that goes, until Burr tries to take over the Spanish New Orleans.
Yeah,
that's his big action.
He's definitely in that. Yeah, that's all things. Burr really wasn't a founding father because he didn't found anything. I mean, he had some very interesting periods of political intrigue, but he had some good moments in the war. I mean, that's great, but I mean, he didn't really establish anything outside of showing exactly how to be the slimiest politician you can be.
So he wasn't in the room, as they say.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that.
Well, wait. Now, was the reason for the duel as presented in the film? Hamilton didn't support him, so that's why they disputed and wanted to shoot each other?
Well, Hamilton was very public in personal insults to Burr. In the way that you wouldn't, during that time, right? I mean, personal insults then look very different than now, but he was very, and he put his name to it too, so he didn't do it behind a pseudonym or anything like that. And so, it was just a particularly nasty public back and forth, where Burr, said enough is enough, let's go at it, and Hamilton just went back down,
taking the glove off and slapping him in the face with it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And because these are two of the biggest egos of the time, right? So it would have been a very fascinating dinner conversation to see those two go at it.
Is it accurate that Hamilton fired into the air and was not going to shoot Burr?
I think that's kind of it's controversial. I don't know if there's any kind of firm documentation, but definitely plays into the mythology. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, when he told his son to go into a duel and do that, I was like, no way, that's terrible advice.
Terrible idea.
If you're going to turn and have a firearm in your hand at all, no one's going to pay attention whether you're pointing it up or at them. They're going to shoot you. That's the point of the duel.
Yeah, they're going to assume you're about to bring it down and shoot me in the face.
Yeah, it was not Hamilton's best move.
Yeah, all right. Well, any final notes to close out on this particular discussion on Hamilton?
Oh, well, I just hope the success of Hamilton the Hamilton is the second best biography I've ever read. The first best biography I've ever read was Guido Holzmann's Mises, The Last Night of Liberalism. So maybe we've got the hip hop opera for Hamilton. We need a good we need a good Mises musical to come next. Also, I highly recommend Bloody Andrew Jackson, which I'm surprised never really caught on in the age of Trump, because the opening song is literally like populism, yeah, yeah. And there's some songs, and it's not nearly as Hamilton quality. I've never seen the play. I've only listened to it, but there's some very entertaining songs at that. So if you're looking for a musical themed history, Bloody Andrew Jackson, very high on the list.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll find that and put that on the show notes page as well. And there is that Mises rap, isn't there? Econ log or something, like they did a Hayek one, Hayek versus Keynes.
Yeah. Hayek Keynes. The first two are great. Those are great videos. The Marx Mises one, but the Keynes Hayek raps are legend.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll post those on as well because those are super fun. And then Guido Holzman, that's a super thick book too, The Last Night of Liberalism, and there's an audiobook version of that. So I'll find a show notes page link for that as well.
And that book's great. It starts off slow. Like, you'll learn more about like Jewish civil society and the Austro-Hungarian Empire than you ever wanted to know. But yeah, once you get Mises to college, it really picks up. And one of the best shortcuts out there for anyone that really wants to go hard in the Austrian economics, I think the best cliff notes for all of Mises's great works are those chapters in that biography dedicated to those books. And if you read that chapter, he'll tell you exactly what Mises is trying to say. He'll tell you who he's responding to, and so that's you can just read those chapters, and you'll get the gist. And the audiobook, again, which is free, as is just about everything the Mises Institute does, has a great narrator, which is huge for audiobooks. So I can't recommend that highly enough. You can skip the first two chapters if you really want to. That's fine. You won't miss much. But it's definitely a great narrative about a man even greater than Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely agree on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, is that Riggenbach who's doing the narration on that one?
No, it's someone else. I think that's the only book we have with him. But I don't even know what his accent is. It just sounds kind of delightfully European, and he makes voices here and there and all this sort of stuff. But again, it's just amazing that an economist, a German economist by trade, could really kind of really nail the narrative as well as I think Guido does. I'm not just sucking up to him because I'm terrified of him, but like it's a really well written book. So again, if anyone out there is interested in Austrian economics, likes narratives, likes storytelling, it's long, you have to work through it, but it's a very good read.
Yeah, well, and the books that Mises wrote are also very long, and he wrote in such an eloquent manner, but English was not his first language. A lot of it's translated from German. And I tried reading some Human Action. I tried reading Socialism. It's way over my head. I had to look up like every fifth word. So knowing that reading those chapters of Holzman's book will give you the gist of it, it sounds like a super nice shortcut.
And one Mises book that I think that you guys in particular might like, if you've not checked it out before, is the Anti-Capitalist Mentality. Mm-hmm. Because in it, it's kind of it's meant for kind of a lay audience. And like when Mises is writing in English for a lay audience, he's actually really good. I think the Mises reader that is kind of laid out similarly to Human Action, but has a lot of excerpts from his popular stuff. I would recommend that long before you ever try to tackle Human Action. Like I think serious scholars should do that, and there's a lot of good values in there, but you can get a lot of the ideas within the Mises reader. But within Anti-Capitalist Mentality, he even looks into why does Hollywood hate capitalism? The only reason they're able to do what they do is because of the great, the incredible nature of mass consumption. Why do these people hate capitalism? And so he looks into those things. And so it's the Anti-Capitalist Mentality, I think, is really one of the most overlooked books of Mises, because it's available for everyone, and it looks at things from kind of a different lens.
All right, we might get Robert to crack a book.
I'll at least listen to the audiobook. That's something I can do.
I could see a twinkle in your eye behind those glasses when he started talking about that one.
Well, it's I love the hypocrisy and people getting pointed out for their hypocrisy. So that's definitely a big, blatant, blazing sign in this world is the blatant anti-capitalist nature of people that survive solely out of capitalism.
Yeah, and very high levels of division of labor that are predicated upon all those other things being
Highly specialized people.
abundantly available.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Tho, we're at the final summary and review portion of the show. So, Robert, why don't you give us an example and a rating, however you want, and then we'll go over to Tho.
How do I rate this thing? I don't even know. If you like musicals, it's well done. Like, I can't really fault the production, the writing, the performances. The performances are really quite impressive. I mean, you normally have, a cast that would perform for 2 hours and they'd memorize all their lines and whatnot. But these are like really long, intricate songs and raps that they're performing. So I could imagine, not flubbing a line of this entire performance. I know they're cutting it between a couple different performances, but still, it's very impressive. So it held my attention in that respect, and it with the rapping and the kind of the hip hop production and performances, presentation. But man, I don't like the mythology of these great men that were so awesome, that did these great things, when in reality, they're creating a system that violates everybody every day, all the time. What is it better than what came before it? Yeah, probably. Should they be lionized? I think you can appreciate what they did, but not mythologize them into god figures and use them as a means of propaganda to further the state. So that's where I come from. If you like this kind of thing, it's better than Les Mis for me. But I would maybe be interested in watching something that maybe had a song every now and then, but wasn't just complete rapping and singing all the time. But it's better than Les Mis. I don't remember what rating I gave Les Mis. I think it was terrible. But this, I would say I'd say this is like a 5, I guess. It's, if you're into this kind of thing, it's probably like a 9. It's like really high quality, but it's just not for me. It didn't make it for me, and they made it for somebody else.
Did you?
I think it's hilarious that the right has embraced this thing and the left is hating it now. It really tickles me.
Did you find that this all being on one set, it felt more like a play versus Les Mis, which had kind of different sets and like almost a movie quality to it that made it significantly different for you? Like watching this, I felt like I'm watching a play. But
I felt the same way with Les Mis, though.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in different locations with Les Mis, and that the particular version that we saw. I don't know what a play version of Les Mis looks like, but it still felt very much like a play, in that it was just constant singing and crap dancing and stuff. I don't know. The plays are a different experience, and you have that play acting, and it is nice to see that. Where you're used to seeing all this movie stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's a breath. I'm not going to say a breath of fresh air, but it is different enough to be like, oh, here's kind of a novel thing. I'm watching this play on my phone or device or whatever, where I'm usually watching a movie. Here I'm watching a play. It's a different kind of cultural experience. It's kind of novel, but I would rather the content be more along my lines of enjoyment.
Like action.
And it doesn't have to be action. Just has to be something that I would enjoy. Like if Tarantino wrote a play, I'd probably dig that.
Okay. All right. So Tho, your final summary, and if you could give it a score.
Yeah, I would give it an 8. And that's mainly just because I think that you do lose something with it, the way that they adapted it from purely the stage to TV, to Disney Plus. I think that you lose a little bit at times with that, which is understandable. My wife was generous enough. We actually, when we had the 35th Mises event, we actually saw the play on Broadway. up there. So that, and I give the play a 10. I think it's ambitious. I think they nailed what they're trying to do. I think it's Hamilton's ideas. I'd give a 3, but I'd give the play a 10. But I think it's a fun time. I think they do a good job of capturing it as best as possible. They make it available to everyone. Again, it's just you can't really capture that full experience with the constraints of filming it. But again, I'll give it an 8, and I think the music's fun.
All right,
I'm really not a musical guy, so I'm just I'm just a sucker for Hamilton.
Yeah, see, neither of us are musical guys either, obviously. But did you find that in seeing the play that it made watching it again? I don't know, like, did you feel like it had more presence than it might otherwise have had because you were there physically at one time? Because in me watching it, I was like, I'm separated from this. But in being at plays and then seeing a recording of it later, I kind of remember being there. And so it, like, I don't know, kind of sparks that back to me.
Yeah, there's definitely kind of that sort of nostalgia, kind of emotional feeling, tapping in there. And you do see it from, it's a very different perspective. It's like the difference between, watching a football game and then going back and watching the replay from TV. And you do see different things, just the camera angles and all of that. And it's interesting. I think that for all of his gifts in writing it, I think Lin-Manuel is one of the weaker performances of the whole play. And I think the guy that actually saw it, which was long after the original cast, I think he was actually a little bit better. But it's just a little bit different, kind of seeing it within the TV view.
Yeah, and speaking of the performances, I'll tend to agree with you, and I'll go into my summary and review here. I liked Burr's performance, and also the guy who played Jefferson and Lafayette. He was Lafayette in the beginning, and then he was Jefferson towards the end. I really liked his performance. He was had great comedic timing and had a nice flair, and his French accent was believable. But all in all, I think that this was definitely worth the watch, though we're not big fans of musicals, Robert and I. But seeing that it was such a cultural phenomenon, and to think that only 10 to 20,000 people per day could see it live, like actually in New York, for however long it was running, several years. But even adding up all of those people in 1 week on Disney Plus, it 10 times the amount of people were able to see it. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's kind of had this resurgence. And like we've talked about, it seems like the lens has shifted from how this was made and originally perceived to how it's being perceived today. And everything is like upside down and backwards and flipped around once again. So it's kind of a commentary on just where things are at today and how crazy things are in the world. So definitely check it out. Hamilton's up on Disney Plus and nowhere else. So it's an exclusive. So, go get your Disney Plus fix and you'll get it. So that's going to do it for our episode on Hamilton. Tho, thanks again for being our guest. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you can stick around for a little bit longer. I know it's late for you, but we have a thing called Kathleen Turner Overdrive available for our Patreon supporters at lastnighters.com/Patreon, where we cut loose just a little bit now that we could be much looser than we've been tonight on this episode. And speaking of cutting loose, Robert, we're going to be uncutting some gems, the Adam Sandler film, Uncut Gems, with our buddy Pat MacFarlane from Liberty Weekly. So he's going to be joining us. And he said that it's a great movie, and it's on the old Netflix. So we will be doing that one next week.
Yeah, good one. I've been looking forward to this one. I've heard good things. I've been refraining from watching it with the hope that we would do it soon. So this is going to be great.
All right, sounds good. And if you could just remind people how to support the show, now's your time to shine. Don't blow your shot here, bud.
This is my one shot. Yeah, you can do it with Patreon. That's our favorite way to do it. But there's many other ways. You can go to Trepster.com and buy some merch. You could leave a positive or negative review on Apple Podcasts. You could interact with us on the social media, Twitter, I think. Daniel does a little bit of. Facebook's the main one. But we could also do the YouTube, and you can leave a comment on the YouTube. So, yeah, all those ways, and I'm sure there's many more. You could tell a friend, tell a family member, tell anybody that's interested in this sort of content all about the show. Thank you very much. Enjoy. Peace.
And one last thing you can do is support the Mises Institute, where Tho works. One of the very easy things that I do is I have smile.amazon.com set up as a donation on everything I purchase to the Mises Institute. And I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. They don't get that big of a percentage, but it does add up, especially if thousands of people do it. So I do recommend that. And Tho, if you could just tell people a little bit about the Mises Institute and what they can do to support it in other ways, and then we'll move into our Kathleen Turner Overdrive for Patreon supporters.
I might be biased, but I think the Mises Institute's the greatest organization in the world. Again, I think that what makes it so unique is that, again, we're not trying to take over. We're not trying to lobby politicians for power or try to get scholars and comfortable, cushy jobs in academia. We're just trying to educate the masses, trying to keep the bench of the Austrian school thriving. And Mises University, which was last week, is I think one of the greatest programs out there. We were able to have it even with everything going on. I can't read best week of the year according to Tom Woods, and I would go along with that. So again, Mises.org. I've got great articles, got free books and podcasts and ebooks and all of that. If you're interested in being a member, you can do it at Mises.org/5for5, number 5 FOR 5. You get 5 free gifts, and that $5 a month to become a full member. You get our magazine, all that sort of fun stuff. Then you can follow me on Twitter at Tho Bishop. It's a weird name, but THO Bishop.
All right, and thanks again for being our guest. You brought a lot of knowledge that I did not have. I only knew of Burr from that milk commercial where he was trying to give the answer, and he didn't have milk, so he couldn't say Aaron Burr. He was like, Aaron Burr! But, and I knew he shot Hamilton, but that's pretty much all I knew until watching this. But anyway, that's our show for the last nighters. So we will say good night from last night, everyone. Peace out. All right, and I'm going to continue for just a little bit longer here on the Actual Anarchy podcast. I know we went a little bit long on the last nighters there, but though I wanted to ask you about the Mises Institute and your name being sullied recently, if you wanted to talk about that for just a couple of minutes for the Actual Anarchy audience, because I've been keeping tabs on it, just following you on Facebook and seeing this woman who was against a candidate for school board or superintendent of a school district in Florida, throw your name in the mud and the Mises Institute in trying to do guilt by association for this candidate, while she didn't seem to be aware that the opponent was also going to be hosted by the same group to talk about the issues or whatever. So if you could just, I don't know, talk to that for just a moment and give us the gist of it.
Yeah. So I run I'm still philosophically anarchist, but I'm a Ron Paul guy. Like I think politics is a useful vehicle for education and networking and all that. And so I try to leverage that. So I host a political group every year or every month. And last month I had the superintendent of schools there, and there was this woman in the audience that definitely kind of stood out a little bit. But she's the president of an LGBTQ center of Bay County, which is where I'm from. And at the end of him talking about the schools here and his campaign, she tried to ask him a gotcha question on whether he thought sexuality was a choice or not, and he said, I think all sexuality is a choice and whatever. Fairly standard, conservative answer. And and then I gave a talk about the riots going on, where I talked about, it's like, look. The main issue here is that we've got an entire generation of people that reject property rights. And then I was trying to make the examples. Like you have a lot of conservatives that view that America is moving leftwards because of, the browning of America and then the fall of the West, Pat Buchanan narrative. Whereas, actually, if you look at it, I mean, the largest group of devoted leftists out there are, white kids that went to college, and that it's the university system, not immigration, that's the big, that's the big catalyst for things moving to the left. It was a fairly conservative audience. I was trying to kind of push kind of a slightly kind of subversive message with that, kind of wrapped up in some red meat. And so I didn't think anything of it. It was a fun time, a fun meeting, whatever. And then last week during Mises U on a Tuesday, I started getting messages about like, oh, there's this crazy lady at the school board who's calling you a member of a KKK organization. And so like she came here trying to bum rush the superintendent with the same question, saying that, I was at this meeting, and Tho Bishop, that represents the Mises Institute, a known neo-Confederate hate group founded by racist nuts Lew Rockwell and Murray Rothbard, was railing on about the browning of America, and how dare you be associated with this guy. And you talk about how systemic racism doesn't exist, but there's a few bad apples. Well, Tho Bishop is the most rotten apple of the bunch. And it was just, obviously I've heard all this stuff from Uncut My Campus and the Southern Poverty Law Center before. I was used to, some of the attacks in the Institute. I can see Adam Bates on Facebook, whatever. But it was so over the top. She couldn't even read the Uncut My Campus hit piece properly. She was trying to claim that the Institute founded the League of the South. And she gave this quote by like Jack Kershaw, who was a founding member, that he said like, oh yes, slavery is okay because look how good Africans have it in America relative to Africa. It's all just ridiculous. So I had another event on Monday. It was great. It happened here in Mises U because I was just showing all the kids and we were all just laughing about it. And so on Monday, I had another meeting with the opponent of the superintendent. And she came unannounced, and so I gave her a couple minutes because she said she wanted to apologize, and like she apologized for calling me a rotten apple. But I was like, so I blew up at her. I was like, look, I don't care about your insult. Like your insult didn't bother me. I don't care about your opinion of me one way or another. But like you're not going to lie about what I said, because she was trying to say that I said the exact opposite of what I was saying. And I was like, look, and I try to make the larger point. Like, look, this is how the left operates. That this person either has no problem knowingly lying about me, or, and I tend to think this is more accurate, I think that she genuinely thinks that I said, anti-immigration stuff because she is so, we've become so polarized politically as a country that, we can't listen to arguments that the other side makes. And this isn't unique to the left. Like, you can see all sorts of boomer Republicans that, anything that anyone on the left says, like they're convinced that, you're reading the Communist Manifesto. Like it goes both ways. So whatever. But like I wasn't going to let her, try to play this. Oh yeah, I'm so tolerant. We need to open our hearts out to people. It's like you have no interest in opening your hearts out to people. Like you're willing to destroy people for simply having a different political opinion. But I was able to work in, John Maynard Keynes was a pedophile. I was able to work in kind of a few of the storylines that I enjoy, because you're seeing this play out within economic history. Mainstream left economic history in America today is this really weird brand of conspiracy theory stuff. Like all these free market economists are actually like, closet racists trying to make sure that we build this order where, we're oppressing minorities and destroying democracy. And it's like, James Buchanan's not that interesting. Like it's all just ridiculous. But I had a fun time just kind of, show it, like, I tried to give her an opportunity. She didn't take it, which was great because it just, let me fuel my righteous anger all the more. I was really seeing red during that. The clips on my Facebook page, you can see the emotion that I had there. But the good thing though is that here locally, now I have people talking about the Mises Institute. So I've gotten several people back home now as $5 a month members. So again, as Tom Woods would say, we always try to monetize the haters. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, well, I just want to applaud you for handling that as well as you did. I know that if somebody came after me making such accusations, even if they were baseless and totally untrue, I would just like blow up at them and not be able to handle it with such grace. So I think that was pretty fun to watch. And yeah, you're a good man, though.
I get it. It was fun. I enjoyed myself.
All right. Well, we went a little bit long. Robert, do you have any final comments before we get into the Kathleen Turner Overdrive?
I just want to thank Tho for coming on and applying his in-depth Hamiltonian knowledge to an episode that otherwise wouldn't have been anywhere near the level. So thank you for that. I'm glad we got our technical difficulties resolved. And you're welcome back anytime you want to talk about anything.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. We would have been devoid of almost all historical notes and accuracies. So
Well, I just appreciate you guys putting up with me. Again, the technical difficulties were on my side. I apologize for that. And I know it could be a little long-winded. Yeah, I get really riled up on this subject, and especially opening up, talking with libertarians, I feel I have to be very defensive of my appreciation for Hamilton. So I appreciate you guys putting up with me.
Right. Well, I did have a predisposed, negative opinion of Hamilton. So
it's fair. It's justified.
Yeah. There's a good reason.
All right. Well, that's going to be our show tonight, everybody. So stick around for Kathleen Turner Overdrive. This is episode 191 of this show. So find the show notes and more at actualanarchy.com/191. And we'll see you guys next week for Uncut Gems with Pat MacFarlane of Liberty Weekly. Maximum freedom, everyone. Peace out.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.